Captain Marcus Blackwood gripped the controls of his battle-worn ship as it skimmed the atmosphere of Xiron, a war-torn planet on the front lines of the human-Zorath conflict. The sky above the planet was painted with streaks of smoke, remnants of the fierce battles that had taken place over the past few weeks. His mind was focused, his heart steady as he prepared for the battle ahead. The Zorath forces had been relentless, their advanced weapons and strategies taking a heavy toll on the human resistance. But today, Marcus and his men were going to change that. The battlefield ahead was a sea of destruction. Craters from bomb explosions dotted the landscape, and the air buzzed with the sound of fighter jets flying overhead. The human forces had established a temporary base on the outskirts of the Zorath stronghold, preparing for a final assault to reclaim the planet. Marcus had seen many battles in his time as a soldier, but nothing quite like this. His platoon was one of the first to land, and as they disembarked from the transport ship, Marcus couldn't help but notice the heavy silence that surrounded them. The usual noise of gunfire and explosions was replaced by an eerie quietness. Something wasn't right. He motioned for his men to take cover behind the wreckage of a nearby building, his instincts telling him to stay alert. "What's going on, Captain?" asked Lieutenant Carter, his voice low but tense. Marcus scanned the area, his sharp eyes catching movement in the distance. At first he thought it was just a stray animal or a piece of debris blown by the wind. But then he saw it again, shadows moving in the ruins. These weren't normal soldiers. They were different. "Stay sharp," Marcus ordered, his voice steady but commanding. "We've got company." The team advanced cautiously, keeping to the shadows and using the destruction around them for cover. The Zorath forces were well known for using unconventional tactics, and Marcus wasn't about to let his guard down. As they moved deeper into the ruins of a once thriving city, the quiet was broken by a sudden burst of gunfire. It came from above, and Marcus barely had time to react before the blast knocked him off his feet. His helmet's heads-up display flickered, and the sound of his heartbeat thundered in his ears. He quickly regained his composure and rolled to the side, using the debris for cover. "Report!" he shouted, his voice commanding but tinged with urgency. Lieutenant Carter's voice crackled through the comms. "We've got snipers, Captain. They're positioned in the upper levels of the buildings. We need to move fast or we're sitting." "Ducks!" "Understood," Marcus said, his mind racing as he quickly assessed the situation. The Zorath snipers had the high ground, and there was no way they could take them out from this position without taking heavy losses. He needed a plan, and he needed it now. "Delta Squad, take cover and suppress fire on the snipers," Marcus ordered, his voice calm but firm. "The rest of you with me. We're going in." Without waiting for a response, Marcus led the charge. He sprinted toward the nearest building, his rifle raised and ready. The sound of gunfire echoed in the air, but Marcus didn't flinch. He knew his men were covering him, and he trusted them to do their job. As he reached the building, he slid behind a crumbling wall, taking a brief moment to catch his breath. His fingers tightened around his rifle, and his eyes scanned the area. The Zorath snipers were still a threat, but he had a plan to deal with them. He motioned for his men to follow him, and they quickly moved into position, carefully avoiding the line of sight of the snipers. Marcus knew they had to act quickly before the Zorath could call for reinforcements. They couldn't afford to waste time. A soft voice broke through his thoughts. "Help me." Marcus froze. The voice was faint, but distinct. It was coming from somewhere nearby, hidden within the wreckage. His eyes narrowed, and he motioned for his team to stop. "Did anyone else hear that?" he asked, his voice low but urgent. Lieutenant Carter nodded, his expression puzzled. "I heard it too, sir. It came from over there." Marcus pointed toward a partially collapsed building in the distance. "Stay here. I'm going to check it out. Cover me." Without waiting for a response, he sprinted toward the wreckage, his mind focused on the voice. It was a cry for help. and Marcus couldn't ignore it. As he neared the ruined structure, he saw something that made his blood run cold. There, lying amidst the debris, was an alien girl, her delicate features twisted in pain, her clothes torn and stained with dirt and blood. Her body was bruised, but she still held on to life. Marcus knelt beside her, his pulse quickening as he inspected her injuries. She was unconscious but alive. He could see the faint rise and fall of her chest as she struggled to breathe. Her skin, a soft shade of blue, was unusual to say the least, but it was her eyes, those striking violet eyes, that stood out the most. They were wide, as though she had seen horrors beyond comprehension. The girl's appearance made it clear that she was no ordinary prisoner. She was a slave, one of the many that the Zorath Empire had used to fuel their war machine. Marcus had heard the rumors about the Zorath's cruel practices, but seeing it firsthand was another matter entirely. "Medic!" Marcus shouted into his comms, but there was no time to wait for a response. He couldn't just leave her here, not like this. She had to be taken with him, no matter the risk. He carefully lifted her into his arms, cradling her with a gentleness that surprised him. As he stood, the weight of the situation began to settle in. The war wasn't just about the battles fought between armies, it was about the people caught in the middle. People like this girl who had suffered because of a war that wasn't her own. "Captain, we've got movement!" Lieutenant Carter's voice crackled over the comms. "Zorath forces are closing in from the east. We need to move now." Marcus looked down at the girl in his arms. She was vulnerable, fragile, and helpless. But in that moment, something shifted in him. He wasn't just a soldier fighting for victory anymore. He was a protector, someone who could make a difference in the lives of those caught in the crossfire. "Get ready to move out!" Marcus barked, his voice firm. "We're not leaving anyone behind!" He wasn't sure what the future held for the alien girl or how this would affect the war, but he knew one thing for certain. His mission had just changed. Now, it wasn't just about defeating the Zorath, it was about saving lives, and that meant everything. Captain Marcus Blackwood moved swiftly through the ruins of Xiron, the girl, now in his arms, still unconscious, but her soft breathing kept him focused. His platoon followed close behind, moving with precision, keeping watch for any signs of Zorath forces. The planet was a battlefield, and every moment counted. Marcus couldn't afford to be distracted, but something about this girl felt different. She was an alien, but her suffering felt no different from that of the humans he fought alongside every day. The team made their way through the war-torn city, using the crumbling walls and destroyed buildings for cover. Marcus's heart raced with the weight of the situation. They were deep in enemy territory, and the last thing they needed was to be caught off guard by Zorath reinforcements. Yet, as he looked down at the girl, something told him that protecting her was now his priority. As they neared the temporary base set up by the human resistance, Marcus's Lieutenant Carter approached. "Captain, we've secured the area. But what do you want us to do with her?" Marcus glanced down at the girl again. She was no longer the lifeless, fragile creature she had been when he first found her. She had a strength about her, even in her weakened state. Her alien features, tall and graceful, set her apart from anything he had seen before. Her soft blue skin, her violet eyes, and the silver streaks of hair all told the story of a race far older than humanity, but one that had been brought low by the Zorath Empire. "I don't know, Carter," Marcus admitted quietly. "But we can't leave her behind. She's a prisoner, and she's been through hell. It's not right to just abandon her." Carter nodded, though his expression was filled with uncertainty. "Understood, sir." Marcus carried the girl into the camp, where the medic team immediately surrounded them. The base was a makeshift shelter, set up hastily by the human forces after weeks of fighting. Tents covered the open ground, and soldiers worked to fortify the area against incoming attacks. The hum of military equipment filled the air, but all Marcus could focus on was the girl. As he laid her gently on a makeshift bed, the medic began to work, checking her pulse, her breathing, and her wounds. The medic was an experienced woman named Lieutenant Harper, a no-nonsense officer who had seen it all in the war. "Captain," she said, glancing at him as she worked. "She's not from around here, is she?" "No," Marcus replied, his voice steady but uncertain. "She's Zorath's prisoner, a slave most likely." Harper nodded, her expression sympathetic as she continued her examination. "She's been through a lot, but she'll survive. She's tough, this one. I can see the scars of her people, their battle marks, if you will, but she's still alive." Marcus felt a pang of guilt in his chest. He had been on the front lines of the war for so long, fighting for victory, but it wasn't until now that he realized the true cost of the conflict. He had always seen the enemy as just that, the enemy. But this girl, this alien, was more than just a casualty of war. She was a person, a victim, just like the civilians who were caught in the crossfire. He turned to Carter, who stood nearby, his arms crossed as he surveyed the camp. "We can't just let her go back to the Zorath," Marcus said. "She doesn't deserve that." Carter frowned. "I'm not saying we should, sir, but what do we do with her? We can't just let her walk around the base. She's still Zorath's property. And besides, how do we even know we can trust her?" Marcus sighed, his gaze fixed on the girl. Her soft breathing was the only sound in the room, and for a moment, he allowed himself to think about what it all meant. She wasn't just another prisoner. She wasn't an enemy soldier. She was a survivor, like him, like his men, like all the innocent people who had been caught in the conflict. "We'll keep her here for now," Marcus said after a long pause. "But we'll need to learn more about her, her people, the Zorath Empire." "We're at war with the Zorath," Carter reminded him. "This isn't a time for alliances." "I know," Marcus replied, his voice steady. "But war isn't just about killing the enemy. It's about protecting the innocent, too. And if she can help us, we can't ignore that." Harper finished her work and stood up, wiping her hands on a cloth. "She'll be all right, Captain. For now, we need to let her rest. But you're right. There's something more here. I can feel it." As Marcus left the medical tent, he felt the weight of the decision pressing on him. He wasn't sure if trusting this alien girl was the right choice. He didn't even know her name. But something about her had made him act, and that was enough to make him question everything he thought he knew about the war. Hours passed, and the girl remained unconscious. Marcus checked on her regularly, unable to shake the feeling that this was a turning point in the war. He had always believed in the mission, to defeat the Zorath Empire and protect humanity's future. But as he sat by her side, he began to wonder, what if the war wasn't just about defeating an enemy? What if it was also about finding a way to stop the cycle of violence that had plagued the galaxy for centuries? When the girl finally awoke, her eyes fluttered open, and for a moment, Marcus wasn't sure if she recognized him. She stared at him, her violet eyes wide with confusion and fear. Her lips trembled as she tried to speak, but the words were foreign, a language Marcus didn't understand. "It's okay," Marcus said gently, his voice soft. "You're safe now. You're with the humans. No one will hurt you." She blinked, her confusion turning to wariness. She tried to sit up, but her body was weak from the injuries she had sustained. Marcus reached out, offering his hand to help her. Her gaze flickered to his hand, then back to his face. Her lips parted as though she was about to say something, but instead she remained silent, looking at him as if trying to figure out whether she could trust him. "It's okay," Marcus repeated, this time more firmly. "You're safe here." The girl's eyes softened slightly, but the wariness remained. She took a deep breath, and in a quiet voice, she finally spoke. "Who are you?" she asked, her voice low but clear. My name is Marcus, he replied, offering a small smile. Marcus Blackwood, captain of the human forces. She studied him for a long moment before nodding, her eyes never leaving his. Despite the war, despite the confusion, a silent understanding passed between them. The girl wasn't just a prisoner, she was someone who, just like him, had been caught in the crossfire of a galaxy at war, and now, together, they would have to navigate this fragile alliance. The days following the rescue of the alien girl, whom Marcus had learned was named Lyra, were filled with uncertainty. Marcus kept his distance at first, not sure how to approach the fragile alliance they now shared. He was a soldier, focused, on one goal, the war against the Zorath Empire. But Lyra was more than just a prisoner now. She was a person with her own story, her own pain. She had spent most of her days in the camp recovering. The medical team, led by Lieutenant Harper, had worked tirelessly to treat her injuries, but it was clear that Lyra had experienced more than physical pain. She was emotionally scarred. Her eyes often held a distant, haunted look, as though she was lost in memories that refused to let go of her. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, casting an orange glow over the camp, Marcus sat outside, his tent. He was supposed to be preparing for the next phase of the battle, but his thoughts kept drifting back to Lyra. He knew she had been through unimaginable horrors, but what had those horrors been? What had she seen? What had been done? To her? A soft voice broke through his thoughts. Captain Blackwood? Marcus turned to see Lyra standing at the entrance of the tent, her figure silhouetted against the setting sun. She looked different now, her posture more confident, though still cautious. She was no longer the fragile, broken creature he had found in the ruins of Xiron. She was slowly rebuilding herself, finding strength that Marcus hadn't expected. He stood up, surprised that she had approached him. Lyra, you're feeling better? She nodded, though her face still held the weight of unspeakable sorrow. Yes, thanks to the medic's care. Marcus gestured to a chair next to him. Sit, it's good to see you up and about, but I was wondering if you wanted to talk. You don't have to, but I'm here if you do. Lyra hesitated, then sat down slowly, her violet eyes studying him. The silence stretched between them, thick with unspoken words. Finally, she spoke, her voice quiet but firm. Why are you helping me, Marcus? She asked. I am an enemy. I am Zorath's property. Marcus frowned, his heart heavy with the complexity of her question. You're not their property. You're your own person, Lyra. They may have enslaved you, but that doesn't mean they own you. You're free now. Her eyes dropped to the ground, and she swallowed hard. But I've been a slave for so long, I don't know how to be anything else. I've spent my life serving the Zorath, doing their bidding. I've forgotten what it feels like to be free. Marcus sighed, trying to find the right words. Freedom is a strange thing. It doesn't come easily, but it's yours now, if you want it. No one's going to force you to do anything. You decide your future, Lyra. Lyra met his gaze, her eyes searching his face as though trying to see if he truly meant it. Slowly, she nodded. Thank you, she whispered. They sat in silence for a moment, the weight of the conversation sinking in. Marcus had thought that his role in this war was clear: defeat the Zorath and protect humanity. But now, with Lyra's presence in the camp, it felt more complicated. He had never considered the lives of the Zorath slaves before, but seeing Lyra, he realized that there was more to the war than just victory. There were people caught in the middle, people like her who had no say in the conflict. As the days passed, Marcus found himself spending more time with Lyra. He taught her the basics of human life, how to work with the human resistance, how to defend herself, how to speak their language. It wasn't easy, and Lyra often struggled with her memories. But with Marcus's help, she slowly began to understand. Despite the language barrier, there was something unspoken between them, something that transcended the need for words. Lyra had been through so much. Her planet had been destroyed, her people enslaved, and she had lost everything she had ever known. Yet she was still here, still fighting for her freedom. One afternoon, Marcus and Lyra found themselves walking through the camp after a long training session. Marcus had just finished showing her how to handle a weapon, though it was clear she preferred more peaceful solutions. As they strolled past the tents, Lyra spoke again, her voice soft. "Marcus, do you think the war will ever end?" He glanced at her, the question surprising him. He had never really stopped to think about the future, only the present, the next battle, the next mission. But Lyra's question made him pause. "I don't know," he admitted. "I think about it a lot. We fight to win, but sometimes it feels like the war just never stops. Every time we push back the Zorath, they come back stronger. I don't know if there will be an end to it. But what I do know is that people like you, like us, are the ones who will make the difference. We're the ones who will change the future." Lyra nodded, though her expression was filled with doubt. "It's hard to believe in that. I've seen so much destruction. I've seen so many people die. My people. They were all killed, Marcus. The Zorath wiped us out, and now they want to use me as a weapon." Marcus reached out and placed a hand gently on her shoulder. "They can't use you anymore. You're not their weapon. You're free, and you can do whatever you want with your life. You're stronger than you know." For a moment, Lyra didn't respond. She simply stared ahead, her gaze distant. But then she spoke again, her voice barely above a whisper. "I don't know what to do, Marcus. I've spent my whole life being told what to do. I don't know how to be free." Marcus squeezed her shoulder gently. "You're not alone in this. We're all learning together. It's not going to be easy, but we'll figure it out." The silence that followed was comfortable, a silent agreement between them. Marcus wasn't sure how the war would end, but one thing was certain. He couldn't fight it alone, and neither could Lyra. They were in this together. As the days passed, the connection between them grew. They weren't just soldier and prisoner anymore. They were allies, bound by the shared struggle for freedom. And though the future was uncertain, Marcus knew that they would face whatever came next side by side. The days in the camp had started to settle into a rhythm. Marcus focused on preparing his troops for the next stage of their mission, while Lyra continued her training. Despite her natural hesitation, she was learning quickly, adapting to the human ways of combat. It wasn't easy, especially for someone who had spent so many years under the Zorath's cruel control, but Marcus could see the change in her. She was gaining strength, both physically and mentally. Their connection had grown deeper, too. What began as a fragile alliance between soldier and prisoner had evolved into a true partnership. Marcus was not just her protector anymore. He had become a friend, a source of comfort in the harshness of war. And Lyra, once a broken slave, was learning to trust again. There were moments when they would sit together in silence, watching the sun dip below the horizon, both finding solace in each other's presence. But the peace they had started to build was about to be shattered. One evening, as Marcus and Lyra were preparing for a new mission, an alarm blared through the camp. The sound was sharp, sudden, and jarring. Marcus sprang into action immediately, his military instincts kicking in. He grabbed his rifle and rushed toward the command center. Lyra, her eyes wide with worry, followed closely behind. "What's happening?" Lyra asked, her voice tight with concern. "Stay here, Lyra," Marcus ordered. "It's not safe." But Lyra wasn't one to be left behind anymore. She had fought hard to become her own person, and she wasn't going to sit idly by when danger loomed. "I'm not staying behind," she said, her voice firm. "I'm with you." Marcus hesitated for only a moment before nodding. All right, stick close and don't stray from my side." Together they made their way to the command center, where the situation was unfolding. The room was chaotic, soldiers moving quickly as they tried to decipher the incoming threat. The screens on the wall flashed with data, showing enemy movements and weapon signatures. "Captain Blackwood," Lieutenant Carter called out as he saw Marcus enter, "we've got Zorath forces closing in on our position. It's an ambush. Reinforcements are already on their way." "Damn it," Marcus muttered, his eyes scanning the data on the screen. "How many?" "Too many," Carter replied grimly. "At least 3 full battalions. They're targeting our outer perimeter. We've got a small window before they hit us from all sides." Marcus turned to Lyra, who had been quietly watching from the corner of the room. "Stay here," ordered again, but this time he saw the fire in her eyes. She wasn't just a helpless prisoner anymore, she was a fighter. "I'm not staying," she said, stepping forward. "I've learned how to fight. You're not leaving me behind." Marcus saw the determination in her eyes, and though he wanted to protect her, he knew she wasn't going to back down. "Fine, but stay close to me and follow my lead." Lyra nodded, a silent agreement between them. Within moments, the camp was on high alert. Soldiers rushed to their battle stations, preparing for the fight that was about to come. The sound of boots on gravel and the metallic clatter of weapons filled the air. The Zorath's ambush was imminent, and every minute counted. Marcus and Lyra joined the front lines, where a group of resistance fighters had already gathered. The mood was tense but determined. Marcus gave quick orders, his mind focused on the strategy they would need to survive the attack. "We need to hold them back for as long as possible," he said, his voice cutting through the noise of the camp. "Carter, you take the eastern flank. We'll hold the center." Carter nodded, his face grim. "Got it, sir." The Zorath forces were getting closer. Marcus's pulse quickened, but he kept his composure. This was what he had trained for. This was what he had been born to do. The first wave of enemy soldiers appeared on the horizon, moving quickly through the smoke-filled sky, their dark silhouettes standing out against the orange glow of the setting sun. "Positions!" Marcus shouted, his voice carrying over the noise of the camp. "Ready yourselves!" Lyra stood beside him, her stance strong, her rifle in hand. She wasn't just standing idly by anymore. She was ready. Marcus could see that she was more than capable of handling herself, and that gave him a strange sense of comfort. She was no longer the frightened girl he had found on Xiron. She was a warrior, forged in the fires of battle. The first shots rang out, and the air exploded with gunfire. Marcus ducked behind cover, his rifle steady in his hands as he aimed at the approaching Zorath soldiers. The camp erupted into chaos as soldiers fired at the advancing enemy. Explosions shook the ground, sending debris flying into the air. The Zorath were relentless, pushing forward with a fierce determination that seemed to never waver. Marcus's focus never left the enemy forces. His training kicked in as he moved from one cover to another, taking down Zorath soldiers with precision. He could hear the sounds of battle all around him, the cries of soldiers fighting for their lives, but he kept his mind sharp, his eyes scanning for Lyra. She was right behind him, moving with a fluidity he hadn't expected. She was quick, precise, and unafraid. Her rifle was steady in her hands as she took down Zorath soldiers with surprising skill. Marcus couldn't help but admire her. She had become a force in her own right, a far cry from the scared, broken girl he had once found. But as the battle raged on, Marcus began to notice something troubling. A group of Zorath soldiers was moving toward the command center, and it looked like they had a different target in mind. Marcus's heart skipped a beat when he realized what was happening. "Carter!" he shouted into his comms. "They're going for the command center. We need to reinforce it. Now!" But before he could react, something unexpected happened. A soldier, one of their own, appeared in the shadows, and before Marcus could even register what was happening, the soldier turned and fired. The shot was aimed directly at Marcus, but it wasn't Marcus who was hit. Lyra, who had been standing beside him, pushed him out of the way just in time. The bullet struck her in the shoulder, sending her sprawling to the ground with a cry of pain. "No!" Marcus shouted, his voice filled with disbelief and panic. He rushed to her side, his heart pounding as he saw the blood staining her clothes. Lyra's eyes fluttered, and she looked up at him, her face pale but determined. "I'm fine," she whispered, though her voice was weak. "Don't let them win, Marcus." Marcus's hands trembled as he applied pressure to the wound, trying to stop the bleeding, but inside he was torn. Betrayal. The person who had shot Lyra had been one of his own soldiers. The war was no longer just about fighting the Zorath. It was about surviving the lies, the distrust, and the darkness within their own ranks. He couldn't lose her, not now, not after everything they had been through. "Stay with me, Lyra," he said, his voice strained. "Please." Lyra gave him a small, pained smile. "I'm not going anywhere." And though the war raged on, Marcus couldn't help but believe that in this moment, hope still existed. The camp was in chaos. The once peaceful night had turned into a nightmare as Zorath forces, ruthless and relentless, continued their assault. The loud boom of artillery and the crackle of gunfire filled the air. Marcus could feel the weight of the situation pressing down on him like never before. The battle had taken a dangerous turn, and now, with Lyra injured and the camp under attack, it was up to him and his soldiers to make sure their stand counted. Marcus was beside Lyra, his hand tightly wrapped around the cloth he had used to stop, the bleeding on her shoulder. Her breathing was labored, but her eyes, though filled with pain, still held that spark of determination. She had refused to be carried away, refused to be treated as a burden. "I'm fine," she whispered through gritted teeth. "Don't worry about me. We need to fight back." Her voice, although weak, had a fire that still burned within her. Marcus could see it now more than ever. This was no longer just about the war between the humans and Zorath. This was about survival, about standing up against tyranny, no matter who the enemy was. Marcus nodded firmly. "You're right. But we need to make sure you're safe first." Lyra shook her head slightly, her determination never faltering. "I'll fight. We can't let them take everything we've worked for." For a moment, Marcus was silent, his thoughts racing. He had seen his fair share of battles, but he had never fought for something this personal. Lyra wasn't just a victim of war, she was now a part of this fight, a key player in a mission that was bigger than any single person. She had proven herself, time and time again. He knew she wasn't the same person she had been when he found her. She had become strong, not just physically, but emotionally. And that was something he respected deeply. But the truth was, he couldn't lose her. Not like this. "All right," Marcus said, his voice calm but firm. "Stay close. I'll get you to safety." The two of them moved toward the heart of the camp where the rest of the soldiers were preparing for the final stand. They would need every hand, every weapon to hold back the Zorath forces that were rapidly advancing. Marcus could see the anxiety in the eyes of his men, but also something else. Resolve. These soldiers weren't just fighting to win, they were fighting for each other. They were fighting to protect their home, their future. At the center of the camp, Lieutenant Carter was giving orders to the rest of the platoon, organizing them into squads for the last line of defense. His face was grim, but his eyes were sharp, his mind focused on the task ahead. "Captain!" Carter shouted as he saw Marcus approaching with Lyra. "You made it!" "We're not done yet," Marcus replied, his voice steely. He glanced at the soldiers gathered around. "This is it. We either stand together and win, or we fall here. There's no turning back." Carter nodded, his face determined. "Understood. We'll hold the line." Marcus turned to Lyra, his gaze meeting hers. Stay here. Don't move from this position. We're going to push them back, but it's going to be dangerous." Lyra's eyes flashed with a spark of defiance. "I'm not staying behind, I'm with you." Marcus hesitated for a moment, but in the end, he knew that she wasn't going to let him go without her. "All right, stay close. We fight together." As the Zorath forces drew closer, Marcus could feel the tension mounting. The soldiers had taken their positions, rifles at the ready, eyes trained on the advancing enemy. The Zorath were preparing for the final push, and it was clear that they were determined to crush everything in their path. The first wave hit with full force, the earth shaking beneath their feet as explosions erupted across the battlefield. The air was thick with the sound of weapons firing, the screams of soldiers caught in the crossfire, and the deafening roar of artillery. Marcus and his platoon returned fire, their movements synchronized and precise. They weren't just fighting to win. They were fighting to survive, to protect what was left of their world. Lyra, despite her injuries, was right beside Marcus, her rifle steady in her hands. She fought with the same fierce determination that had defined her since the moment. She was freed from the Zorath's grasp. She moved with fluidity, her every action calculated and deliberate. There was no hesitation in her movements, only the quiet strength that had been forged in the fires of battle. Marcus glanced at her briefly, his heart filled with pride. He had never imagined this, fighting alongside someone who had been through so much, and yet was still standing strong. They were a team now, and in that moment, Marcus knew that they could win this war, not through sheer force, but through the power of their unity. The battle raged on, with the Zorath forces pressing forward, but the humans refused to give an inch. Every inch of ground was fiercely defended, and every soldier fought as if it were their last. Marcus could see the weariness in their eyes, the blood on their hands, but they didn't stop. They couldn't. Not with so much at stake. Hours passed, the battle stretching into the night, and the tide began to turn. Slowly, the Zorath forces started to retreat, their advance faltering under the relentless assault of the human resistance. The explosions began to subside, and the sound of gunfire grew quieter, but Marcus knew that this wasn't over yet. The Zorath would regroup, and they would come back stronger. But for now, they had won. The human forces had held the line. As the smoke began to clear, Marcus looked around at the battlefield. The ground was littered with the remains of the Zorath forces, their machines disabled, their soldiers either dead or fleeing. The victory was hard won, but it was theirs. Lyra stood beside him, her body still tense with adrenaline, but her eyes were filled with relief. She had fought, and she had survived. Marcus felt a sense of pride wash over him, not just for the victory, but for the strength Lyra had shown. "You did it," Marcus said, his voice full of respect. "We did it." Lyra smiled faintly, though exhaustion was evident in her features. "We did," she agreed softly. "But the fight's not over, there's still so much to do." Marcus nodded. "I know. But tonight we can rest. Tomorrow we plan. But for now, we've won." As the soldiers gathered together, tending to the wounded and securing the camp, Marcus and Lyra stood side by side, watching the aftermath of the battle. It was a hard-earned victory, but it was a victory nonetheless. The war was far from over, but they had proven one thing. No matter the odds, no matter the enemy, they could stand together and fight. And in that unity, they would find the strength to continue, to rebuild, and to finally bring an end to the war. The war-torn planet of Xiron had fallen silent, but the cost of victory was evident. The once bustling military camp, now a place of hardened resolve and weary soldiers, stood as a testament to the sacrifices made. The aftermath of the battle left its scars, both on the land and in the hearts of those who had fought for their survival. Marcus Blackwood stood at the edge of the camp, staring out across the shattered landscape. The sun was rising, casting a pale orange light over the ruins. It had been days since the final stand, and though the Zorath Empire had retreated, the war was far from over. But today, Marcus allowed himself a moment of peace, however brief it might be. The camp was quieter now. The sounds of battle had been replaced by the murmurs of soldiers tending to the wounded, repairing damaged equipment, and reinforcing the perimeter. Some were talking, others were lost in their thoughts, but there was an air of something new, a sense of hope. For the first time in months, Marcus allowed himself to feel it too. "Captain," a voice called behind him. Marcus turned to see Lieutenant Carter approaching, a tired but determined look on his face. "We're making progress, sir," Carter said, his voice filled with both relief and caution. "The camp's secure. We've cleared out the last of the Zorath soldiers in the area." Marcus nodded, his gaze never leaving the horizon. "Good. But we both know this isn't over. The Zorath will regroup, and they'll come back. We can't afford to drop our guard." Carter acknowledged the truth in Marcus's words. "Of course, sir, but for now, at least we have a little breathing room. And I think it's safe to say that the men are starting to believe we can actually win this. They're motivated. You've given them hope." Marcus smiled faintly. "Hope's a dangerous thing to give people, but it's all we have." For a moment, the two men stood in silence, watching as the camp slowly returned to life. But then, Marcus's thoughts turned to the one person who had made this victory feel personal. "Lyra," Marcus said quietly, his voice filled with both affection and concern. Carter nodded. "She's resting. The medic said she'll recover, fully. That shoulder wound of hers isn't anything to take lightly, but she's tough. We all saw that." Marcus looked back toward the camp's medical tent, where Lyra had been taken after the battle. Despite her injury, she had insisted on staying in the thick of the fight, refusing to let her wound slow her down. Even now, after the battle was won, Marcus knew that the war had changed her. She had found her place in it, not just as a survivor, but as a leader in her own right. "I need to see her," Marcus said, turning back toward the camp. The medical tent was quiet when Marcus entered. Lyra lay on a cot, her shoulder bandaged, her eyes closed in a peaceful slumber. She looked so different now from the broken, frightened girl he had found months ago. The change in her had been gradual, but now, as he watched her sleep, Marcus could see the strength that had emerged in her. He sat down beside her, his heart heavy with the weight of everything they had been through. War had a way of shaping people, for better or worse, and Lyra had emerged from the ashes of her past, a warrior. She had once been a slave, someone who had been forced into a life of servitude. But now, she was her own person, fighting for something bigger than herself. Lyra stirred in her sleep, her eyelids fluttering before she slowly opened her eyes. She looked at Marcus, and for a moment, there was a flicker of recognition in her gaze. She wasn't just seeing him as a commander anymore, as someone in charge. She was seeing him as a person, a friend, someone she could rely on. "You're awake," Marcus said softly, a smile tugging at his lips. Lyra smiled faintly, though. Her face was still pale from the pain. "I'm not dead yet," she said with a weak laugh. "Though, I think I came close." Marcus chuckled softly, though there was a sadness in his eyes. "You've been through a lot, more than most people can handle." Lyra's expression softened. "But I'm still here. We're both still here." She paused for a moment, looking at him with a mix of gratitude and something deeper. "I never thought I would survive. I didn't think anyone could help me after everything the Zorath did. But you gave me something I never thought I'd have again. Hope." Marcus shifted uncomfortably, not used to being praised for something so personal. but Lyra's words struck a chord within him. He hadn't done it for recognition or thanks. He had done it because it was the right thing to do. Because he couldn't just leave her behind, not after everything she had been through. "I didn't give you hope," Marcus replied quietly. "You found it yourself. You fought for it. All I did was give you a chance." Lyra's eyes met his, and in that moment, they understood each other completely. Their bond was more than just that of two soldiers fighting for a common cause. It was a bond forged in shared suffering, in the fire of battle, and in the hope of a better future. "Maybe," Lyra said softly, "but you were there when I needed you." Marcus didn't know how to respond, so instead he simply nodded. For a moment, they sat in silence, content in the quiet companionship they had found. The war was far from over, and there would be more battles to fight, more lives to be lost. But for the first time, Marcus allowed himself to feel a glimmer of hope, a hope that, despite the darkness of the galaxy, there was a future worth fighting for. The next few weeks passed in a blur of preparation, reinforcements, and rebuilding. The human forces had claimed victory on Xiron, but the Zorath were still out there, still a threat to the galaxy. Yet, in the midst of the chaos, Marcus saw something that gave him renewed strength. Lyra. She was no longer just the injured, helpless alien girl he had found on the battlefield. She was a leader in her own right, helping strategize with the commanders, training the new recruits, and organizing the defenses. She was no longer a slave to her past. She had become a symbol of hope for the future. As the human resistance began to rally together, the threat of the Zorath Empire loomed larger than ever. But there was something different now. Something powerful. The humans were no longer fighting for survival alone. They were fighting for each other. And as Marcus stood beside Lyra, watching the stars slowly light up the night sky, he realized that their fight wasn't just about defeating the enemy. It was about rebuilding a future where freedom could flourish. The galaxy had been scarred by war, but with people like Lyra and the hope they had found in one another, Marcus believed that a new dawn was possible. A future where humanity and all who had suffered under the rule of the Zorath could live free. And together, they would fight to see that future come to life.